All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tech School, our weekly uh, live session with our guest speakers. And we welcome everybody today. I welcome our cohort who are participating from CSUSM and those who are joining us from elsewhere. One quick announcement that Curlene's led me do is that we are doing our Summer Innovation Challenge at CSUSM. It's open to students and the community, and the Innovation Challenge is focusing on helping K through 12 schools get back to campus this fall. So we're looking for people to come and submit ideas about how to help these K through 12 schools get back to work and our kids back to school. So if you want more information, go to the CSUSM Innovation Hub website and you can learn more. So thank you very much. And we welcome Kerry here today. And I'm guessing Stephen's going to do another introduction. So I'll let Stephen go from there.
Yeah, we always have technical things. I know, Stephen, can you allow people to share screen, and we'll have Kerry be able to share a screen? I think.
Yeah, we should be good now.
We should be good. Okay, it's great. Stephen, you can if you want to add anything more, then I'll introduce Kerry.
No, I mean, Sam kind of covered it, right? All that we usually, either you or I kind of say is, welcome to tech school. I guess for those of you who are listening in on or tuning in on YouTube, feel free to leave a comment, like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. The more you do that stuff, the more interaction we get, the more people we reach, right? And so the more startups, the more entrepreneurs, the more people in the community we can help with some of the information that gets shared today, right? More people can see this fireside chat. So yeah, if you have a chance, feel free to do that.
I see Joanna on. Thanks for coming on, Joanna. She's waving. You guys, Kerry and Joanna are kind of like BFFs. That's how
I love Joanna.
Yeah,
Everyone does, but I love her a lot.
She did good. I had one little small bio that I can actually say, Kerry. That's the one I had. I had one from this one. We'll see how it sounds. This is great. Kerry's the CEO, founder of Diversity by Design, a San Diego-based firm that uses design thinking to take on complex diversity, equity, inclusion challenges, impacting organizations and communities. I like that part. I thought that was really clear. Yeah. I think you can kind of like maybe add more, but thank you so much for coming on Tech School, and we have tons of questions, but I know you had this kind of great presentation, so I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Curly, and thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Samuel, as well. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I always love a short bio because then we can just get right into the meat of everything. And so I got to hear some great positioning statements while we were queuing up from this. And so I'll give you mine as well, because I think it's always something that you're like honing and tuning as like a business owner. So you all can give me some comments and let me know what you think about my current positioning statement that has probably changed a few times in just the last month, because it's always evolving. So hi, my name is Carrie Sawyer, and I am the founder of Diversity by Design. We help leaders and teams to cultivate inclusive environments where people can do their best work. And so I do that through workshops, through coaching, through talks, and really helping people use a human-centered design thinking lens to come up with an inclusion roadmap, is what I like to call it, so that they can understand what inclusion looks like for them, and then chart a course to get there. So I made up a lot of that as I just went right there. So that,
that's good.
Glad this is recorded so I can go back and see what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm excited. So Curly, can I just kind of like jump into what we're going to talk about today?
Yeah, you could just. I think you should just jump in. I feel like what you probably. I know you spoke yesterday too. I feel like it's all going to be all relevant to the startups.
Okay, very good. So I'm going to share my screen. I created some slides, and I'm going to try to keep this as conversational as you can when you're in a virtual environment. So Curling, if people are asking questions or anything, or even if you think of anything that might be helpful to dive into as we're going, feel free to just like pause me. So I am a fast talker, so just like get right in there. And
yeah, that's good. And we have the chat open, and so everyone, just as a good reminder that Kerry said, if you have any questions, you can definitely put it on chat. You guys get priority on that. But we had some other questions from startups that I was going to ask Kerry too.
Okay, perfect.
We see your screen.
Perfect. Lovely. All right. So today we're going to have a conversation about prioritizing inclusive practices in business. And what I really wanted to talk about was actually going a step further than that and putting inclusion first. And so I always like to start with just a definition so that we can make sure that we're all on the same page, because I know that people think about all kinds of things differently, and I don't think inclusion is any different than that. But this is one of my favorite definitions to use. And so inclusion is the degree to which someone feels valued, respected, accepted, and encouraged to participate fully in an organization. And I love this because of all the different aspects that it brings in. Like, think about the last time you felt valued and how great that felt, valued at work specifically, and even outside of work, feeling accepted at work and encouraged to actually share your ideas. And so this is what we're going for when we talk about inclusion. And I have some just little notes in here. So like in the chat, like feel free to add in like how would you expand this definition of inclusion from, the experiences that you've had, and we'll keep an eye on that, and I'll be able to go back and look at it later as well. And so I like to think of inclusion as a sliding scale. And you see, we've got these lovely, lovely, easy to understand smiley faces going from exclusive to inclusive. And on the exclusive side, I just want you to take a look at those words. Unvalued, disrespected, rejected, discouraged. Those are pretty terrible places to be at any point, but definitely not how you want to feel at work. And so just keeping that in mind when we're not being inclusive, we might not being all the way to exclusive, but this is not the direction that we want to trend. And so how do we keep people moving towards that green? And I would say, I have this little scale here just for people to think about how you tend to feel. And I know that we have a ton of startups and entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, everyone on this call, but think about the last time you worked for a company that you weren't running, and just give yourself a chance to take a rating here. Like, how did you tend to feel? Were you included all the time? Were you mostly included? Was it mixed? I think a lot of us live in the mixed state. And I think that we can, especially as, diverse founders, female founders, like whatever your difference might be, whatever your intersections are, sometimes we feel included and sometimes we don't. And I think that I'm challenging us to raise the bar on that, because I think that that's a low bar. I want people to be in like the green, and I want us to be creating businesses where people feel in the green, like that's their set point. It's really rare that they even dip out of that. And I think that that's something that we can do as founders and as startup owners, because we're creating exactly what we want. And why wouldn't we want to create an experience like that? And we'll talk a little bit about why and what the benefits of those are next, well, in a little bit. So now I want us to take the flip of this. How do you treat others? So take another look at this scale and rate how you tend to treat others. Do you tend to treat others inclusively all the time? Are you mostly inclusive? Are you sometimes inclusive, where sometimes exclusive, on down the scale? And I think that it's natural for us to rate ourselves like, oh yeah, I'm totally mostly inclusive, or I'm definitely inclusive. But I bet that the average is somewhere between like mixed, maybe dipping even a little lower, because when we're inclusive with people, like this is a conscious thing. You're not like, you can be accidentally inclusive, but inclusion is not a passive activity. And so you're actually trying to make people feel valued, accepted, respected, and encouraged to participate fully. And I would wonder, like, how often do people leave interactions with us feeling maybe a little bit excluded, maybe like their idea was undervalued, maybe feeling like they were disrespected or rejected or discouraged even to stand up and share something because maybe it didn't go along with what everyone else was saying. And I'm not saying that we do this intentionally, but I'm looking to raise our awareness on how these interactions are going so that we can be more intentionally, more consciously inclusive. So I share those two kind of scales to get us thinking, and really to get us thinking about this idea that inclusion starts with you. Yes, we all want to feel included and we want to be treated inclusively. And we also have a responsibility and an opportunity to treat those people around us inclusively. And I started to hint at this, but inclusion isn't a passive activity. If you're sitting in a meeting, you're not automatically being inclusive to those around you. You're not automatically making people feel encouraged or accepted or valued. Those are like actions that you're taking. It's what we think, what we say, and what we do that makes us included or makes us inclusive inclusive or not inclusive. And so we're really thinking about how can we ramp up on that? How can we be intentional about actually doing things that make people feel included? And then we get to reap the benefits of that. So I'm going to go back for 1 second. So what I was thinking, so as I was thinking about this idea of being inclusive and running an inclusive business and having that at the center of everything, this idea becoming a nucleus of inclusion came up. And I was like, oh, like what does nucleus actually mean? And it was a perfect thing. So this is a perfect definition for nucleus. So the central and most important part of an object, movement, or group, forming the basis for its activity and growth. I was like, what if we could become like a nucleus of inclusion as a leader, as a startup founder, as someone who has ideas and influences the people around you? If you become a nucleus of inclusion and you like think about yourself like moving around to all the different pockets that you exist, whether that be family, your community groups, where you're volunteering, where you're working, wherever that is, you're spreading like inclusion, like it's goodwill and cheer everywhere you go. And inclusion is contagious. And I just thought that that was a really great way to think about it, and a really great charter and kind of a North Star for how can we become a nucleus of inclusion as startup founders, as business owners, as leaders in our organization. So why do we want to be inclusive, to become nuclei of inclusion? It's because inclusion is the pathway to our best selves. Like when we feel included, where there's this expansive thing that happens where we have more ideas, we're friendlier, we're more collaborative, we're more expressive, we're able to problem solve better. Like we can really accomplish anything in this state of inclusion. And when you're just feeling okay or when you're feeling shut down, you're really just not at your best. You're not doing your best work. You're not the best version of yourself. And so as, again, leaders, how do we create this environment where people's best self can come out, where they can feel included and they can shine and bring all of their skills and gifts to the table? So inclusion inspires a lot of great things. And there's so many stats and so many studies about the benefit of inclusion and diversity and equity in the workplace. And you can, just Google that and there'll be so many different things, but, teamwork, creativity, the ability to learn faster, learn more things, problem solving, collaboration, communication, innovation, all the things that you want, especially when you're at the beginning of your company and you're setting this groundwork. You have so many questions, you have so many problems to figure out, so many opportunities, so many structures to develop. You want people, even if it's just you want to be at your best. If it's one or two people, you want each of you to be at your best. And when you interact with other people as well, you want them at their best and in this inclusive environment so that all these great things can come out. And I have another little note here that as we're thinking about this, like what other things have you seen this kind of open, inclusive environment inspire in your teams or in your groups? Because this is a short list. All kinds of amazing things happen when people feel like they can be themselves and bring their best selves to a project, to a team, to their work. Okay, so now we're going to drill in a little bit and talk more specifically about how you can prioritize inclusion first inside of your business. And I really see this as kind of a two-track thing. And you have to think about them both at the same time. And so these are like the parallel tracks that are running for us as business owners, as startup founders. First thing that I need to do to make sure that my business is putting inclusion first is to think about how I'm running my business inclusively. So that's all of the internal decisions that are being made. The second track is how am I making sure that the product or the service that I'm creating is inclusive? And even within your niche group, right? And whatever your customer base is, there's a way for you to be inclusive within that customer base. I got to hear about two different startup founders. One was talking about an app for architects. So how can you be inclusive within the group of architects? And then another one was for senior care. How do I make sure that the senior care that I'm providing is inclusive? And so you've got both that internal and that external track running at both times. And I would say that if you had to prioritize, like which one do I think about first, you think about running your business inclusively first, because every single thing that you come up with is going to guide everything that comes after that. So when you think about how do I run my business inclusively, you think about inclusive policies, procedures, practices, communication strategies, leadership strategies, your mission, vision, and values. And the list goes on. I know that everyone that's looking at different startup frameworks, like there's a billion different things that you have to figure out as a founder, but asking yourself this question, how do I create an inclusive policy? For each of these will help you to build inclusion into the foundation of your business. And, you know, start wherever you are. You might have started working on some things and you're finished with those. Check those off. We'll go back and look at it with an inclusive lens, and then go forward with everything else, having that same inclusive lens. And as you're thinking about this, this question, so how can I, is actually designed specifically to help people brainstorm. The idea of like, how can I, or how might I, how can we, or how might we, is actually an expansive question. And when your brain hears that, it starts trying to answer the question, which is different than if you make a definitive statement. So like, how can I create an inclusive policy versus I need an inclusive policy? When you make that definitive statement, your brain starts to basically disprove it. Like it wants to know why, like it wants you to validate it. So when you say, how can I, that gets you and the people that you're working with thinking about solving that problem versus trying to like push against that problem that you're looking at. So that's a little brainstorming hack that you can use as you start to go through and explore. Maybe you haven't ever thought about how you would create an inclusive procedure or inclusive leadership strategy. But by asking yourself this, how can I question, it's going to help your brain to start problem solving and also the people that you're working with. So definitely use that. So the second track was the how can I create an inclusive product or service? And again, we've got, you know, how can I create inclusive customer research, inclusive branding and marketing, making sure that we're embodying our mission, vision, and value in an inclusive way. And the list just goes on and on. And so you might be starting to think, wow, this inclusion first thing is a lot of work. Inclusion isn't everything. And it's not a lot of work, because if you don't do it, you're going to find out later on that you're going to have to do some rework. But it is in everything. And that's where I also want to help people to kind of change the way that they think about inclusion, because typically at a company, you'll have like a diversity and inclusion department or a team over here that's working on it. And they're put into this silo and asked to solve all of the diversity and inclusion problems for everyone. But diversity and inclusion doesn't look like that, because it's everyone's job. And even just in these two examples of lists, inclusion goes through every single part of your business. And so you have the opportunity to think inclusively about it. And the word opportunity, I actually don't even like that when you're thinking about being inclusive, because it makes it seem like it's a choice. You get to decide to be inclusive, or you just get to decide not to be inclusive. And I would say, like, as leaders, we have both an obligation and a responsibility to be inclusive to everyone that we come into contact with. That is, making everyone that we come into contact with feel valued, respected, accepted, and encouraged to participate fully, because we are giving our all to this business, and we want to create an environment where people can give their all to our supporting our business and to our interactions as well. Okay, so this is like your big strategic question. If you are wanting to put inclusion first, how can I design my business to be inclusive for my employees, my internal partners, my external partners, my customers, and my communities that we serve? And so this is like the layer up from these two slides that I showed before. But this is what it is. And I underline the word design, because this is an intentional thing. This is a choice. You are actually taking the time to design, and we're trying not to be like unintentionally inclusive, but being consciously inclusive, being intentionally inclusive in the design of all of these different interactions and experiences that we have. And so I think it's really interesting. I heard a stat that a lot of startups start out diverse, and then they actually end up losing their diversity. As they grow and get bigger, as they grow and get more successful, they become less diverse than how they initially started off, which at first you're like, oh, that's crazy. Like, how does that happen? But one of my hypotheses for that is that they stop thinking about the design of being inclusive, because they're growing so fast. They're no longer making those intentional inclusion, intentional decisions to be inclusive, and intentional decisions to foster diversity and to make that grow in their company. And so as you're growing, whatever stage you're in, you're constantly in this intentional phase of, how do I design this in? How do I make sure that my processes and procedures have it embedded, so that as we grow, we continue to foster inclusion, and it becomes like second nature for us. Okay, so here's our call to action to start building inclusion first. Here are the three places where I would start. The first place is really thinking about how you can perfect your brand of inclusive leadership. Because if you are starting from a foundation of inclusion as a leader, then all the decisions that you make, how you treat people, all the interactions, those will all be based in inclusion as well. And so you're figuring out what your leadership style is anyways, even if you're doing it unintentionally. Take that pause and be intentional about it. Craft an authentic leadership style for yourself and make sure that you build inclusion into that and figure out kind of what that looks like. The second place that I would focus is developing inclusive company values. And you might be at a stage where you're like, values are like down the list. They're not that important right now. We're just working on these other things. But I would say pause, because the company values are the things that are your guideposts. And it can be fun to do a values and branding exercise to really understand, what is it that you stand for? How do you want to appear out in the world? And what values and tenets do you want to connect to? And if you create those in an inclusive way, then again, when you're looking back at, how do we make this decision? This thing happened out in the world and we need to have a response to it. You check your values and see what do our values dictate that we do? And if inclusion is built into your values, no matter how big you grow, you will have that come out in the expression of your values into the world, which I think is really great. I mean, I think an example of this right now is, the different companies that did or did not give public responses to George Floyd being murdered and the Black Lives Matter movement kind of blowing up around the world, right? But companies that have inclusion built in their values, it's easy to be like, yes, our stakeholders, our board, our employees, like, these are our values and we're going to say these things. Companies that are like, we don't know if we should, like, are they looking at their values? Because I bet that a lot of those companies have values that would support speaking out and taking a more public stand. So, but it makes things like that much easier when they're built into your values, because this is like the agreement that you have both with your internal supporters and your internal employees, and then your external partners and the world as well. So I think getting it into your values is super important. And then the last thing that I have is just start where you are, like start prioritizing inclusion first. How can you do that on both tracks? And so take a look at what you've got scheduled. Where are you in the process of building your business? And how can you, in whatever step you are, start to look at it from a more inclusive lens? And so that's going to be different for everyone, but just starting to build that muscle, starting to exercise those skills. And it'll get easier and easier as you go through the different parts of, building this startup and growing the startup. And we want our startups to be, our companies to be wildly successful. Like, plan for that now. When I think about inclusion and how it grows in a business, I think about physics and trajectory. And you can totally tell that I was once a STEM major, because these are thoughts that I have. But if you're standing in a place and you launch a projectile and it goes where it goes, and you take even just like step over 1 inch and you launch it with the same force, it's going to end up in a completely different place. And that's how I see inclusion in business. When you build inclusion into your foundation, you're going to end up in a completely different place than if you didn't start there. And, it's never really too late to start thinking more inclusively, to building it in. It just takes more effort and rework, but I think that it's definitely worth it. And, we saw some of the great things that come from inclusion. We just kind of scratched the surface of that. But I hope that even if you've already started and you're far along, that you would consider taking an inclusive lens on a lot of the policies and procedures and problems that you're tackling at this very moment, and just start where you are. All right, so curling, that is actually my last slide. Those are our calls to action. I would love to answer some different questions. I have my thank you slide with my contact information as well. But yeah, so we got
that's great. I actually like how that flowed really well too, because some of the questions, hopefully they were answered in that format. The ones that we had for some of the, yeah, I think you covered some piece. I know we got one on the chat too. Sometimes I put my cohort on the spot. Sunny, you put something on the chat talking about maybe what type of goals, or did you want to clarify maybe that question, or did Kerry answer your question about some of the goals?
Oh no, it was when she had the slide and she put in the chat, like, in addition to what she defined inclusion was, I was thinking like strategic goals that came into mind, and structure that came to mind when she was going through the slide.
Oh, no. Okay, that's great. No, that's good. That's really good. Sometimes I do open it up. Just I have a few different questions, but I actually feel like it's a really good group here. Professor Clark, do you have any initial questions? I know you've been working with most of the startups closely on stuff, but do you have any initial questions for Kerry on what she presented?
I don't have any initial questions. It made something come to my mind that I a while back was thinking about, years ago, I thought as a person who is running a business, for example, one of my, I guess, elementary thoughts was, wouldn't it be easier if everybody in the world who is interacting in business spoke the same language, right? Because it would just make business so much easier. And what I realized after doing some, just thinking about it for a while and talking to some people, it's not that we should emphasize that everybody in the world speak the same language. It would actually be better if everybody in the world spoke every language. And it comes to mind because I speak more than one language, and I lived in Hawaii. And for example, in Hawaii, they have their Hawaiian language, and it's just the example of like the word aloha. Like it means so much more than just hello and goodbye. That that we can use it in so many more situations. It brings so much more value to our language and how we communicate when we use, there's a lot of words that don't translate. We always talk about that. When we talk about linguistic things, is they don't translate from one language to another. You can't express a certain emotion or feeling in, say, English that you might be able to say in another language. And so I feel like it's the same thing with the inclusive environment. It's this idea is that it's so important to bring all the values in, because then you can take what's the best from every perspective, and it just enriches your environment so much better. And so anyway, that's just a thought that came to mind while we'll listen to you, Carrie.
Yes, that's awesome. Because it is about taking the best of like everyone's idea, and the more building blocks you have to choose from, the better. You get like the best of the best of the best. And that idea always ends up being more powerful, stronger, more effective than just the idea of one person without all those extra pieces and insights built into it as well. Absolutely.
I was thinking about a few different scenarios. I know I like the fact that you have the STEM background because we're in tech school.
Yeah.
That's great, Carrie. Got back to that. But you know what? One still came to. I know you had the call to action. I think that was great. I think you covered some of the questions, but I think there's one question. If we were just a small team, sometimes we just have two co-founders, right? What would be a call to action for those two co-founders? Is it actually just going in and prioritizing some of the things that you said? I mean, like kind of maybe designing, helping make this perfect this brand. It should work on company value statement. The two working on it. What would be something actionable for those two co-founders?
Yeah. So really I don't know at what stage, typically people are like, oh yeah, I'm ready to do my policies and procedures. Like maybe that never sounds like a fun thing to do, but you're creating it accidentally. Yeah. How you're doing something is like how you're probably going to do it again the next time that you do it. And so thinking intentionally about that. But even if there's only two people, making sure that you're able to work together in a streamlined way where you feel like you're both accepted, valued, respected, and expected, welcome to encouraged and encouraged to participate fully. Sorry, I totally mix up all of the words in that, but use the definition from before. And also it's not just you two though, because whenever you interact with someone, you're taking the values of your company into those interactions. So how you treat your external partners totally matters, right? How you treat your potential customers totally matters. And so how can you be inclusive in those interactions? And then also thinking about the product or service that you're building. How are you making sure that it's inclusive within that target? Even thinking about senior care. Okay, so that's an easy one for being inclusive, because how am I making sure that all the different races, all the, the different genders, where people are being sent, the people that on the, making sure I'm being inclusive of who I'm sourcing to host my seniors, so that there's a people that look like them, and then making sure the seniors that can get into the program are inclusive. How are we vetting them? What are our any kind of criteria? There's so many things that you can think about in an inclusive way on both your product or service development side, and then also how you're running your company. So starting with those mission, vision, and values and getting inclusion built into that. So then you have this basis oh, we said we're going to be inclusive and our customers matter first and our communication is always clear, whatever your values end up being. You can use that and put that lens forward as you're making decisions and as you're growing, as you're pivoting. Those things will, like I said, they'll change where you end up based on where you're starting. So.
No, that's great, and that's a great answer. I never gave an answer that broadens that. So now this is great. One other thing was actually internal. You said prioritizing. There's these two tracks, right? I love how you totally gave me the priority on that. Now, prioritize on how you run your company. Now, some groups were actually, we want to have an all-women's team. What do you think about groups that have one all-women's team? And I had other groups at UFC, they want all-women's teams too. What do you think about that? And what does that look like?
So I guess it depends. And honestly, like as a diversity and inclusion person, I totally get wanting to have an all women's team because girls rule, boys rule. But I'm just kind of, no, but the thing is that you're going to need ideas from everywhere and from everyone. And so if your product is a female only product, then having an all women's team is more okay than if your product is not all female, because if you are serving both genders, then that means that you're going to need to have experiences and perspectives of the male gender as well. And then also all the research says that homogenous teams, no matter what that looks like, perform less well than diverse teams. And that is including like gender. So all male teams and or all female teams perform worse than gender balanced teams. And like for me, I know a lot of incredible women, and I'm like, oh, I want this person. And I look at my team and I'm like, oh, I need like more men, because I can't be a diversity inclusion company and not be diverse and inclusive, right? And so if your product isn't just serving females, you're doing a disservice to the men that you're serving by not having a male perspective. And so thinking about how, what are those roles though? Because you can still be super inclusive even in how you're being inclusive. For example, like we typically, lots of males are hired for like finance and CTO and this and that. Well, flip the script on that. Hire a female for CTO and for finance, and hire a male for HR. Like, these are, just think about how you're constructing your team. And, of course, there's always like the legal side of it where you can't discriminate against gender. There's that part, but that's when you get to a certain size where, they start enforcing things like that. But still, think about your customer base and what's the best way to serve your customer, and what does that team look like? Gender agnostic, right? So
that's great. That's great. I know we have Stephen always has at least a question. Stephen, you have a question for Kerry?
Yeah, I got a quick question for Kerry. Hey, Kerry. Just a quick question for you. What's the biggest problem that you see? And this might differ based on the size of the business, whether it's a startup or large corporation or somewhere in the middle. What's the biggest issue you see just facing businesses in terms of, their approach to diversity and inclusion, and how would you, I guess, solve whatever the problem that is?
So I think that's it's definitely a multi-layered answer and even a multi-layered question, but I think that I'll kind of go back to one of the things that I touched on earlier, and that was that they treat diversity and inclusion like a silo. There's a team of people and they're the ones like, do you have any idea how many chief diversity officers' mailboxes got blown up when they're like, what should we do about this? How do we respond to the civil unrest? Diversity and inclusion is everyone's job. And so the faster that you can help to teach people that, yes, we might be the experts and strategy might come from us, and you might be able to come to us for questions, but you have a role and responsibility in fostering diversity and inclusion yourself. And we're going to help you with the tools to keep things consistent in our company. But this actually comes from you. It's so interesting because diversity and inclusion strategies typically start at the top of the company, right? And they actually don't end up ever getting down to the middle of the company, to the managers who are working with the people who are doing like the day-to-day work, right? And so how do you actually infuse inclusion into the managers? Well, that's by teaching the managers their role in inclusion, because inclusion isn't really about that, high level strategy. It's about how you interact with the people that you work with every day, right? So how do you actually foster that environment at more of a micro level versus a macro level? I think that that's probably like the biggest opportunity, is just totally flipping how we think about inclusion. And the same way that people go through sexual harassment training and financial training, like you also need to go through inclusion training, because you need to understand how to be an inclusive leader and how to foster inclusion on your team. Because if you're not doing that, you're not getting the best out of your team. And so I think the other thing I would say is like having people actually like making inclusive leadership a skill. in the leadership training. Like there's so much time spent on, well, actually that's not true. There's lots of managers that never got trained on anything. And you hear about that a lot in corporate America, especially. But if you're going through training, inclusion should be part of that leadership training, because as a leader, you're modeling so many behaviors. You're teaching your team what is okay and what's not okay. How okay is it? Is it okay to talk to people in certain ways? How do we treat people? Like all that is coming. People are watching the leader, because that's how you know, our mind is like, what they're doing is like the right way. And that's how I get promoted, because that's what they do. And I can move up too if I do what they do. So managers are in this incredible position. And I don't think that that's capitalized on enough when it comes to teaching inclusion from the people that, you know, are in charge of the team.
That's great. I know we have to try to be more inclusive on the people asking the questions. I know we have Joanna online too. Joanna, have any question or feedback? And I just popped that by. I do have. Oh yeah, Joanna's can hear.
I'm here. Let me come back on. I don't have any questions, although I'm thinking about, you know, my corporate America experience and thinking about, you know, I find that often there's a lot of, it's just a comment that I hear a lot of conversations of that are like, people are trying to plan team building, or they're trying to figure out, you know, effective ways to manage remote teams. And I think like recently I was part of a conversation where the general manager was trying to plan like a team building activity, and they planned out this like really like super competitive team building thing where they're gonna split into teams and they were gonna like compete. And I was like, I don't know in the current environment whether that seems really appropriate.
Oh yeah.
I guess I wondered if you have thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think that it's always good to get people involved like on the team. And sometimes people just don't feel like doing extra work, so they don't want to raise their hand to like plan the team building. But you know, team buildings can often be centered around alcohol, which is not inclusive. Not everyone drinks for personal or spiritual reasons. You know, parents can always do things after 5 because they have to go home. Some people don't like to get up early because they do get to sleep in. Like it's, how do you find that mix? But having that conversation is going to get you to a much more inclusive answer than if somebody just decides to go for the like hyper competitive. You might have people on your team who have disabilities that you can't see, and they don't want to do something physical, right? So how do you figure that out? Like
the same thing, right? You have somebody who's like, you know, someone who's maybe like really overweight on the team, right? And then the manager wants to buy t-shirts and they don't come in that size, right?
Yeah,
like,
it's this anxiety, right? Like this person is sitting there like, oh God, I'm not gonna, their t-shirt, like it's like, why?
Not gonna work.
So how can you like have these conversations? And part of inclusion is having difficult, like what we would consider difficult conversations, right? And being vulnerable, being open, especially in leadership, like being open and being vulnerable and having, you know, I don't know all the answers and that's okay, but I'm going to ask, and I'm going to make mistakes and that's okay, but I'm going to ask anyway and try things and learn from my mistakes. One example that I love to give of, you know, just having these difficult conversations and falling down, but then getting back up is, so Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, a few years ago, he was at Grace Hopper, which is of course the largest female tech conference in the world now, I'm pretty sure. And he got up on stage and the president of Harvey Mudd was interviewing him. And he went on this whole thing about how if you just put your head down and do your work, that you will get noticed and you will get promoted. This whole meritocracy thing, which of course we know is not true for anyone who's not like a white and or I'm not sure his nationality, but Indian male or Asian male, like there's like different rules depending upon who you are. And meritocracy is not a thing for anyone because there's absolutely a glass ceiling for really all minorities. I'll just say that and I'll keep moving from there. But he got roasted for saying that because you're sitting in front of audience of women that are like, I do work hard and I get skipped for all of these reasons. He got roasted on, you know, immediately, social media, the news, like roasted everywhere. Now, what did he do? He admitted his mistake, he apologized, and then he implemented programs at Microsoft to like make sure that people were actually being able to progress in a fair and equal way, right? And so had he not made that mistake by trying to have this difficult conversation and falling flat on his face during it, but he rose up in integrity, right? You admit your mistake and you do better next time. Had he not done that, like these programs wouldn't have existed and he wouldn't have been made aware of this. Like, I mean, I don't know why he wasn't already aware of it, but that's okay. That's like a different thing. But he wasn't aware of the power that he had to make a difference in this challenge of the females in his company. And so how can we as leaders rise up in integrity when we fall down and expect to fall down? It's going to happen. We're going to make mistakes, but how we get back up is really the key. And then what happens after that is normally that's really the biggest learning opportunity for us.
So I guess that sort of leads me to another thought, which is one of the things that I'm seeing is that there's not a solution that necessarily always fits to get all of the different populations. And so sometimes the answer is multiple answers, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep. I was just thinking that as you were talking, like maybe you have to do a few different things.
A few different things. Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes there's not a time zone that we can all meet on. And so what do? We meet in one time. And so how do you find a solution that works best for the most people? And then if that doesn't work, then how do you find multiple solutions?
Yeah.
All good stuff.
That's great. I'm looking at some of my questions. I have a few more, but you know what? Let me talk more. I think I gave you a heads up, Kerry. This is tech school, and we usually talk about how can tech be used to help maybe a leadership team or a team in general to at least follow these kind of guidelines that you're kind of laying out. Is there something of that nature? I know for sales teams, they use Salesforce. Is there an inclusive force out there that someone? But I'm joking, but you know, is there something that can help on or more on the technology end that you've thought of, or that's all?
So I'm going to take an expansive definition of technology.
Yes, great. Love that.
Because a pen and a paper is technology. But I actually have this this incredible company, and they do a lot of free resources. I want to share my screen again. They are actually specializing in diversity and inclusion for startups. And they have this Better Startup Toolkit. So D&I resources for founders. They have free workshops and webinars. They have this really cool thing. They have a special grant where they actually do office hours. If you're a startup and you want to find out more about D&I challenges and how to overcome them, you can actually like do a 15-minute like free office hours with them. And I actually know these people, and they're really good people. I met them through my, journey through Intel and through Qualcomm. But they have all these really cool resources for startups specifically. And I feel like there's more research being done. They're doing research around D&I and startups. And as they're doing that, they're creating special tools. And so these are the technologies that they offer. And I think that they're really great. And I'm totally fascinated by how startups are using D&I to start, and then how that impacts them. But they have all these different things. I was even just looking at the job boards and directories. These are all kinds of different tools that you can use as you're trying to potentially hire more people or find out where, different groups of minorities are. There's just lots of different good stuff in here to check out. So I definitely encourage you. This is, and Curling, I can send you this link so you can share it in your email, but it's a Alaria Research. The Alaria is the company. And then they have this .org/startup toolkit. So they've got a lot of really great stuff and free stuff too, and upcoming webinars. So they're really interested. They're doing this again. They have some grants that are supporting this research. So it's not just like, they're going to try to sell you something. They also have an inclusion measurement tool, which not a lot of people are working on at all, because inclusion is a lot harder to measure compared to diversity, but they're working on that. And so they're using a lot of their research and their talks with different startups to help with that. So I highly encourage you check out. There's so many good things on this page. I actually just want to take like a week and just read every single thing on the page, because it's just a lot of really interesting research that they've started to get together specifically for startups and founders.
That's great, Kerry. And that toolkit, totally something of that nature that kind of gives them some guide. That's what I wanted. So that's perfect. My other question is from my daughter. Me and my daughter had an extensive talk last night about certain things. It kind of goes on your track thing. One, have inclusion in your company, right? But also this other track, having inclusion in your product. She was talking about at this time, Dad, I think it's great for African-American Black people to start companies. I think it's a good time to do that. She was just learning and doing research on some of the stuff she put on her hair were created. She thought it was a Black-owned company, but she said, "No, that's from Pantene, Dad. I just found that out." I think she did. Yeah. So she was just talking about like, I think more African Americans should be making maybe hair product or something for them. It's kind of like for them, by them, right? That's what she was thinking about. So we had this discussion on that. So I said, I'll pose that to Carrie, what she thinks about that. That's all. Yeah. It's for my daughter.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like, and I obviously I don't know like how the different, master or like really popular hair brands decided to go off and, they want to create products for all the different segments of people. And so they did that. And with all the powerhouse money that they have, they're able to do the marketing. And then you're like, it becomes like a fixture, right? That's typically all based on like capitalism, right? And the wanting to make more money and to capitalize wherever you can. Whereas, I mean, the people who like for us, the idea of for us, by us, of course, the founders want to make money in that as well. But there's also a different insight that you have when you're designing a tool that's for you, or designing a product that's for you. So I think that there's lots of really good things. So I was trying to think like of an example of a product where you're like, you can kind of tell that this probably wasn't like male and female products. Like a lot of female products, I feel like are designed by men, and you can tell because you're like, why is it like this? I don't think that it would be like this if we were designing it for ourselves. So I think that there's a lot of really special things that can come because it's just like, when you're thinking about getting all the different ideas in to make a really great product, you want to focus in on your user group, and your user group can give you so many insights on what should be in your product. And so when you're coming from that perspective as the designer, then you have this advantage. And I'm going to say advantage in quote, because that also can give you blinders, which is why you still want those diverse ideas from people who are different to help build on the idea that you're creating. So there's this opportunity to be able to specialize, to come from like a firsthand perspective, firsthand knowledge, but then have someone say, hey, what about this? Because they're seeing it differently than you. And that can infuse a lot of extra things that you might not have thought of. So diversity of thought is still important, but it's really great to have that perspective when you're developing a specific product. I've used this product, so I know is a much stronger than, oh, I saw someone or I know someone who used it. You become a user and a designer, and there's definitely pitfalls in that. But if you mitigate those, you can really maximize, and then again, bring in those diverse thoughts so that you can still get the benefit of innovation, right?
Yeah, that's great. So you're telling us having that balance, right? Still have that balance. That's great. I always do kind of like these kind of final thoughts. I know we have Professor Clark. I'll give him any final thoughts he has, and then Stephen, and then I think we'll close it out. But thank you so much. I think this is so worthwhile during this time too. So let me just say that first. But Professor Clark, any final thoughts?
Well, I just want to say thank you for everybody who joined. Thanks, Carrie, for coming on and sharing your insights. It's really appreciated, and it's something that's we find really, really important at CSUSM. It's inclusiveness is an important part of our mission, and so we like to thank you for coming and sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
Stephen, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just echoing Sam there. Thanks for coming on, Carrie. It was awesome to be able to learn from you. I know that diversity and inclusion are kind of at the forefront of our minds today, and there's a lot of us out there that don't know where to start, right? Or think, okay, how do we approach this, right? Because we want to do the best thing, for us and everyone around us, but sometimes it's difficult. So I think that conversations like these are a great thing for a lot of people. So thank you.
Good. Awesome. And definitely check out that Alaria research link, because they have a lot of like where to start and where to start thinking about this specifically from a founder perspective. So I think that'll be really helpful. And then you can build inclusion into the foundation and just keep that as like a main lens as you move forward through all of the amazing phases of startup.
And Carrie, just thank you for giving us your lens, right? I think you're really authentic, really great. And I like this one quote I got put is like, inclusion is contagious. That's my quote for today from you. I like that part. We have to put that on social media, but thank you so much for coming out. Thank you.
Thank you. This was awesome, guys. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, cohort. You guys did great. And we'll talk later. Take care.
Bye.